I want to transform this neglected overgrown spot in my yard into a cutting garden in just one season. I can already dream up how this would be the perfect spot to grow all kinds of flowers, but I have to act quickly and choose wisely to guarantee as many fresh flowers growing in just a few months. I know spring planted summer bulbs would be my go-to solution to get fantastic flowers in only a short period of time. I think we can do something better for this spot. It's very sunny, so it's quite a waste to just let it be. This spot had an old rotting shed where a vulture couple decided to raise chicks years ago. After the baby vultures abandoned their nest, I dismantled what remained of the collapsing structure and then abandoned the spot for a few seasons. I knew a complete cleanup would require a bit of sweating. So on a sunny and warm March day, I take on the brunt of clearing the area from all the overgrowth and rubbish tangled by vines. I throw any remaining rotting lumber into a pile to continue decomposing and try to attack the viney knotted mess one layer at a time. I think, sure, a day of heavy labor would be enough to get this spot ready to plant. I think that's called foreshadowing. An important thing I think I remembered to do was to make sure there was no poison ivy around here, and as far as I remember, there wasn't any, especially now that I can't see if poison ivy has emerged already with leaves. Otherwise, I'm in for a lot of trouble. To keep me motivated, I imagine all the beautiful lilies, dahlias, and gladioli I would be harvesting in just a few months. I love incorporating flower bulbs into my gardens, and in a cutting garden, I can use them to also beautify my home. Despite all my motivation, I am not the only one ready to quit only a couple hours into this quagmire though. They don't make us like they used to. With one tool down, I turn to my trusty good old shovel. After clearing the viney mess above ground as a seasoned gardener, I have a clue that what waits for me underground is exponentially more challenging. By the end of the first day, after only clearing about a third of the area, I'm about to give up on everything. But a gardener never gives up. We just temporarily disengage. By the next day, with the area partially cleared, I know I need to actually plant something to keep up the morale. I just so happen to have 4 bare root roses waiting to be planted. I only dare to plant roses in very sunny and airy spots here in Maryland because of how humid our summers are, unlike California, a haven for roses. This would be the perfect spot to try them. I had chosen some beautiful heirloom roses in warm pink and yellow pastel shades, including the magnificent Princess Charlene of Monaco, with its peony-like blooms that give old-world charm to flower arrangements. After a couple days on a chillier morning, I resume my Herculean task to clear the entangled roots. Alright, this is already the 3rd day trying to clear this spot. I'm finally getting to the worst of the roots, and I can see light at the end of the tunnel. But what if that light is an oncoming train? I don't know. I rushed to finally get the whole area cleared and ready for planting. I already ordered summer bulbs and started to raise seedlings, so I couldn't wait to have the space ready. Turns out that tangled roots would not be my only stumbling block here. The soil here has turned out to be a bit good, a bit bad. It's a lot of clay and a lot of rocks, which I got most of the big ones out. I have a plan for these already, but I gotta get the soil texture correct. To get this soil in its best condition, I'm gonna use a product that I haven't used in a while, only because it's technically a renewable resource, but it renews so slowly that it's best to use other things like leaf mold. Obviously I'm going to use that as well, but peat moss is just very good at turning clay soil into really good friable soil. The secret in using peat moss is to mix it thoroughly with your clay soil. It lifts air pockets into the clay and allows water to freely soak and drain through the soil. I only add peat moss once when establishing a new garden bed in a particularly tough site, because I find that afterwards I can simply continue amending with composted leaves and mulch. Adding lots of organic matter to this spot would be an essential step to allow proper water retention in this southwest facing slope, which does tend to accumulate heat. So it turns out that this spot here is quite the heat trap. Even in a rather cool spring day, I can already feel all the heat build up. In summer, I'm sure plants will need extra water, but it also means that the roses are gonna love here, I think. To further enrich the soil, I liberally spread a well-balanced organic fertilizer. This would ensure I could get a high-yielding cutting garden in only a few months. That, coupled with the fact that a lot of the summer bulbs I'm using already have lots of energy stored in the bulbs or tubers, I could ensure that I would have a flower harvest in the first months. Now that the soil is incorporated, light and fluffy, it's time to think about the paths and the design. Thinking a very classic and simple 4 rectangle design that should give me a lot of planting space and good access. The soil texture couldn't be more perfect now. I could not wait to see all this labor flourish into something spectacular. And of course, I will use the ample amount of rocks I unearthed to my advantage. I could already envision these making the most perfect rustic garden path possible. The fact that they are free is the cherry on top. I dig up a shallow trench where I envisioned a path and begin to piece together each rock into this mosaic, settling soil around them to fix them in place. As I pick and lay them, I try to orient their flatter side facing up so as to create a more even surface. That being said, I fully expect this will be a rough textured path that forces me to slow down as I traverse it. I also fully expect this path to end up riddled with weeds, but this is a problem for future me. All in all, while slow paced, this is a more enjoyable, meditative, and creative step for me than outright tedious. A few days later, with the temperamental March weather turning cold, after my body has recovered a bit from this strenuous work, I turn to the more gentlemanly art of fine gardening. I start with my favorite spring-planted summer bulbs that would quickly reward me with majestic blooms. With the hard labor done, now it's time to focus on the joy of gardening, which is planting itself. Establishing a cutting garden is going to be something new for me. I never had the privilege to have such a space. I've always felt a bit bad cutting flowers from the main garden. This time, I'll be able to do it freely on this separate space, although knowing myself, I don't know if I'll want to completely take all the flowers away. I'm going to obviously plant some summer bulbs, which should give me immediate impact. Lilies and gladioli are very dependable and they should bloom in the first year, especially the gladioli. Growing gladioli bulbs is very easy. They grow profusely. Now, outside in a regular bed, they may be a bit more unwieldy, only because they need the staking to keep them upright. You can cut them a little bit before they actually bloom and take them inside and enjoy their beauty indoors. I know that lilies grow really well here in my garden, so I'm hoping that this exposure here is just going to make them bloom profusely. I'm growing more colors than I usually would because there are some colors that would clash with my color scheme right there in the display garden, but here in the cutting garden I can grow colorful rainbow, and I can even harvest them before they fully bloom and have them and enjoy them inside, where color schemes can be different, obviously. And that just allows me to grow more varieties, and that's always a plus. Even if you don't have a separate area to be just a cutting garden, you can still devote a little bit of your space to a cutting area. If gladioli and lilies can give me fast, reliable blooms, I was also planting a summer bulb, or technically a summer tuber, that would require a bit of patience, but would reward me exponentially in the future. Peonies is one of those plants that you gotta plan ahead if you're especially planting them from tuberous cuttings like these. These are the more affordable way of planting them because you could buy the whole plant already and they should bloom the next year even. But these might take a few years. If you give them everything they need, they'll develop a bit sooner. But there is a secret I'll tell you if you want them to be successful that I learned the hard way up in the front yard. First, you're going to inspect the tubers you buy. You want larger tubers rather than smaller ones because the larger ones will flower much sooner. These things obviously will still grow, but they're going to take a long time. In any case, you also want them to make sure that they're firm and not soft and soggy. I like to pick the ones that have a bit of growth already in the eyes, that you know that the plant is alive and well, and they can even be a bit oversprouted, unlike some other bare roots that you want to make sure to get them as early as possible. It's fine if they started to leaf out a bit, in my opinion. That just means that they're going to start growing as soon as possible. You plant them in early spring, as I'm doing, and the most important thing is you do not bury these too deep. You want these eyes to be poking out a bit. They grow very close to the ground. About 1 to 2 inches deep is all you really need to do. Besides these summer bulbs, corms, and tubers, I also choose Eryngium or sea holly that is sold as bare root plants to provide me fast blooms that work beautifully in flower arrangements. I'm really happy to see the state of health of these roots because they can rot easily. As you can see, they have a rather long taproot, so it's kind of important to dig deep to put them in place and to do this as fast as possible so they don't dehydrate. After planting this first batch of easy, reliable flowers, I roughly mark where I bury these bulbs, tubers, and roots with sticks so I don't disrupt them in the coming days by placing other plants around them. I make sure to water them thoroughly, especially the tubers and roots, to give them the best chance of establishing strong roots before the weather warms up. I cover the surface of the soil with some mesh to dissuade critters from digging them up, and I take a moment to notice just how much the spot has already changed, and imagine how much more it will change in the coming weeks. Some days later, I returned to try my hand at growing my trusted summer bulbs in bare root plants. I had to try growing Aquilegia, also known commonly as columbine, here in the cutting garden, only because last year I was pleasantly surprised at how easy it was to grow from seed even. These are bare root plants, and they may look a bit flimsy. I'll plant them immediately, not let the sun bake their roots. There actually is an American native, so it should be easy enough to plant. It does really well in partial shade, I discovered, but I want to see how it performs here in full sun. Will it bloom more? Will it bloom this year? I'm not sure. Another very reliable summer tuber is the mighty canna, although in this case I wasn't planting them for their blooms. I would not consider cannas as a perfect candidate for a cutting garden, only because I think them as more of a foliage plant than really a flower one. There are some better varieties that have more showy flowers that I'm definitely incorporating into my cottage garden. So while I wait for my choice varieties to arrive, I got a mix of canna varieties to trial, and I'm going to trial them here in the cutting garden only because it's a space that I don't care as much as what's happening here, and that way I'll know exactly if any of these is a good variety to later take into the main garden, either maybe as a foliage plant or as a flowering plant. Let's see. And after dotting the whole garden with all kinds of buried plants, I make sure to cover the ground with some type of mulch so the soil doesn't dry out. I end up recycling any organic matter from my garden into my own mulch material. This saves me from having to dispose of yard waste, turning it into valuable organic matter for the soil, and conserving water in the process. With most flowers already planted and protected with mulch, all I had to do was to wait for them to grow and bloom. Except one thing was bothering me still, how basic this garden looked at this stage. I want to increase the visual interest and the character of the space, and I have a lot of resources around, and that's just sticks. So I was thinking I'm gonna do a short wattle edging, sort of like a fence, that should just give a bit more separation between the beds and give some definition to the space. To create a charming cottage garden-like edging, all I have to do is transmute discarded tree trimmings into a work of art. I simply cut stakes of about 18 to 24 inches in length from thicker stems using loppers. Cutting one end square and the other at an angle makes the next step of hammering them into the ground much easier. Since my soil now was fluffy and stone-free, this was an enjoyable, easy step. I spaced the stakes about a foot apart, driving them halfway into the ground around the perimeter of the beds. Then I gathered thinner, flexible sticks to weave the basket-like wattle. The important thing to consider when choosing these types of sticks is to find sticks that are long and flexible and a bit narrow so you can still weave them through. Other than that, it's pretty self-explanatory, frankly. I find that pear trimmings, apple trimmings, and elm trimmings are quite flexible, so those are always good trees to choose from. The secret is to simply weave each run of stick back and forth, alternating every now and then. Now there is a drawback to this, is that it may attract more slugs, only because of all the nooks and crannies where they can hide. So if you have a slug problem, you might not want to choose this. But since this is quite a sunny spot, I think it should be okay. It's quite sunny and dry. And just like that, my fledgling garden gains an informal air and rustic charm. I cannot wait to see how it will look full of flowers to be harvested. And as spring unrolls a mantle of piercing green over the mountains, my main garden erupts with spring bulb color throughout. I take this opportunity to add more flower possibilities to my cutting garden, betting on annual blooms to thicken the bouquet of the summer bulb inflorescences. Certainly I couldn't leave snapdragons out of the cutting garden. They are quite the versatile plant and they do well as a cutting flower. I don't know if they're gonna have beautiful large blooms and straight stalks this year, but if they overwinter here, and there's reason to believe that they would because it's quite the sunny spot, then they would produce this next year. I end up planting another workhorse summer bulb that would provide ample flowers in this first year, the wonderful calla lilies. Planting them couldn't be easier as they only need to be buried a couple inches below the surface with the sprouting ends up. And I could bet that they would thrive in this extremely sunny spot. To ensure a continuous supply of blooms for flower arrangements, I must keep sowing what I like to call supporting actors in a bouquet. I think any cutting garden needs a bit of the wispy flower arrangement plants like baby's breath or forget-me-nots. I'm going to start a new batch of them today. And I'm using obviously the soil block method because it just allows for so much versatility when starting seeds. The first step here is to screen out the regular potting soil. I buy regular potting soil instead of seed starting mix. I'm sure seed starting mix is better suited for the job, but it's more expensive, so. If the beautiful large blooms of summer bulbs like lilies, peonies, gladioli take center stage, these more humble blossoms give depth and mass to any arrangement. With the potting soil screened, I add enough water until it feels like a cookie crumble. Then I fill a piece of pipe with soil and pack it down using a wooden cylinder. I carefully slide out the soil block and place them in a tray ready for seeding them. Some of the flowers with fine seed, like the gypsophila, also known as baby's breath, prefer to only be scattered on the surface so light will aid in germination. So I cover the trays with a pane of glass and place it under grow lights to speed up germination. Once seedlings grow several pairs of leaves, I sometimes transplant the soil blocks into cups with holes drilled until they're large enough to be planted in the ground. This method allows me to grow sturdy nursery quality seedlings of all types and try out new varieties for a couple of cents each. This is the first time I'm growing Craspedia. I have no clue how easy it is to grow, but I do know that it's supposed to be good for the cutting garden, so in the cutting garden it goes. Now my one concern is what if groundhogs love to eat them? Because I do plan on putting a fence, but it might take me a few weeks to get to it considering all the other jobs in the garden that need doing. I'm going to be growing Shasta Daisy, and I've grown it before, not as a cutting garden but as a bedding plant. It's been a few years, so this time I'm planting it here. It should have a lot of sun and hopefully it blooms a lot so I can harvest the blooms. I keep adding more annuals into my mix from batches of flowers I had previously sown and were ready for the garden, including an earlier sowing of gypsophila. The straw flower looks awesome. It's ready to go into the ground. And the gypsophila, while it may not be as big and stout, because there's several seedlings here, I think it's going to work. At least I hope it will. And it will produce the clouds of flowing little white flowers that are great for flower arrangements. Besides the larger, more developed seedlings grown in cups, I also plant out some of the smaller ones still in the soil block stage directly on the ground. Even as I put in all these filler annuals, I circle back to check on the progress of the first plants I had planted, the roses, hoping they would show good progress, and sure enough, they did. I was a tad worried that this rose would not sprout, but now I finally see, after a lot of rain, I finally see a few buds poking out. It's not as strong as the other one, but hopefully it just loves this spot. And from what I see from all the plants that are already planted, everything is loving it so far. And the roses are not alone in showing promising signs. All of my summer bulbs start putting out new shoots. The lilies zoom in growth. The sea holly sports several leaves soaking up the sun. Columbine produces timid sprouts, and even the peonies start to unravel its first leaves. With most of my plants in place, I just have to wait for them to do their magic and grow. I do know that once I get this running, I might have a problem because I might not have the courage of cutting the blooms, but that's the purpose of this garden, so we will see how much of a cutting garden it turns out to be. Fast forward to a few days later, with a helping hand from the weather, not only are my plants growing at a breakneck pace, but something else is taking advantage of the perfect conditions. Of course, after a lot of rain, we have the garden completely filled with weeds. I'm gonna do something about it. For the inside of the beds, it's gonna be good old hand weeding. But for the middle, I'm thinking of using a herbicide I bought some years ago. I didn't use it beyond trying to eradicate some poison ivy. Didn't quite work there, but I'm gonna do it in the path. Should be easier than trying to pull it off out of these stones. It's organic, it's based on lemon oil, so hopefully also kind of keeps the little gnats and mosquitoes away. Let's see. By mulching my beds liberally, I can tamp down this weed pressure, but ultimately, especially in the first year of growth, and on a new spot that used to be a weedy mess, it is normal to see many undesirable plants emerging from the soil. Removing them while still young is the best way of keeping things under control. With these beds weeded, I know exactly where other plants have emerged and where they haven't, so now I can know where to put dahlia tubers that I still haven't planted. Dahlias are going to be a mainstay flower here in the cutting garden because they produce so much and I have so many tubers available. If there is one summer bulb, or more precisely tuber, that will provide you with the most bang for your buck, I would say that dahlias are it. They come in all kinds of colors, forms, and sizes, so I'm sure you're gonna find some that you're gonna love. If planted in spring, they will start blooming profusely from mid to late summer, all the way into frost. All you need to do is bury the tubers just below the surface. What makes them specially versatile in a cutting garden is that unlike some of the other summer bulb flowers, such as lilies and gladioli that bloom only once a year, dahlias produce more flowers the more you pick them. I feel no pressure harvesting as many blossoms as possible from them because I know they will actually encourage more to emerge. Because dahlias benefit from staking or support, I like to place my handmade metal conduit Tudor towers over the spot where I plant dahlia tubers so that as they grow, they self-support on the wire sides. These towers also happen to make my garden a bit more formal, which I happen to enjoy. Now that the main perennials have sprouted and I know where they are, I can start planting some other annuals that will fill in the space and give me additional blooms. This is ageratum, and also there's some coreopsis in the middle. Zinnia is definitely something I need to fill in, and I'm going to be sowing it in stages because I want to have a succession of blooms that I can cut from, because zinnias do get a bit old after some weeks of growth. So that's what I'm going to do to ensure more blooms. Even as I continue plopping these warm, loving annuals wherever I find a spot, I suddenly realize that my garden is starting to look more and more like a proper cottage garden. Instead of growing in neat farm-like rows that would signify a utilitarian purpose, by planting things in groups and drifts, I run the risk of having the cutting garden feeling just too pretty and precious to be harvested. Oh well. With these last warm loving annuals added to the plot and summer knocking at my doorstep, I plant out some last things to fill up the gaps. Now that the main planting of gladioli is already big and showing foliage, I'm going to plant a few bulbs that I saved inside. That's going to make them flower a few weeks later than these. This staggered planting method is a good strategy borrowed from my kitchen garden to ensure continuous production of blooms for harvesting. And speaking of harvesting, although my cutting garden still needed to grow a bit to reach maturity, I could already start harvesting the early bloomers. This is the first time that I'm going to be cutting blooms from the cutting garden, and I need to cut them even though there's only a few because I want to encourage more blooms to form, especially in things like snapdragons. If you don't do it, they're not going to grow. And so on a bright June morning, just 3 months after establishing this garden that used to be a mess of debris and weedy vines, I go out to harvest my first bouquet of cut flowers to be enjoyed indoors. Not only have annuals like these snapdragons started to bear, but the trusty calla lily summer bulb is producing beautiful inflorescences, and by the looks of it, they are extremely happy with their new spot. And to my surprise, the glorious heirloom rose opens up its first bud, and what a show. I add it to the collection basket and then start thinking of how to build this first celebratory arrangement to officially inaugurate my cutting garden. I like to use these vintage flower arrangement frogs that I collected. They help stems stay upright without the use of florist foam. This sustainable option can be found in flea markets and such. They also allow you to make arrangements in very shallow receptacles like this dessert chalice. I stick the calla lilies into the frog as structural elements and slowly begin to shape up the arrangement with the help of the pendulous snapdragons. As the first harvest from the new cutting garden, it needs a bit of extra help from my main garden to flesh out this arrangement. So I go out to my front yard cottage garden to gather a few extra blooms that could be spared. The front yard roses are just past their peak bloom, and I can only imagine how the new heirloom roses I planted in the back will look in a few days. I gather a few sprigs of the abundant feverfew blossoms that will do the job of the wispy fillers every old-fashioned flower arrangement needs to look just right. In our modern hectic lifestyle, it's a privilege to be able to slow down and go outside to pick one's own home-produced flowers to brighten the house. To me, it is simple acts like this that make for a truly rich life. And while I can count this first harvest as a clear success, the cutting garden is only starting. Just a few weeks later, the yellow rose I had planted starts to pump out bloom after bloom. I had indeed found the perfect spot to grow roses. The calla lilies continue to produce heavily, and the whole space slowly becomes more and more alive and lush. It starts to become a daily joy to go out and see the development of each plant. Observing this whole space slowly bursting into color, I almost wish I can let all the flowers stay to see the effect. Even though I grew this spot specifically to harvest flowers as soon as they bloom, there's something in me that still resists the concept because as a gardener, I just want to leave them be to be enjoyed in the garden. But I gotta remember the point of this is to enjoy them inside. Each new blossom seems to get better and better. The calla lilies look straight out of catalog. The Asiatic lilies I had planted early on open in splendor even though it is their first year. When harvesting lilies the first year, you gotta be mindful that you don't cut too much of the foliage out. They're gonna grow short for the first year. So it's not ideal for flower arranging to have such a short stem, but it's what I can do at this point. Removing the blossoms actually does help the bulb create a bigger bulb for next year because it takes all the expenditure of energy into the bulb. And that's why you need to allow as many of the leaves, which are like solar panels, that will get that energy and store it in the bulb, and then you're gonna have a taller lily next year. Forget-me-nots and other annuals like this snapdragon keep showing more and more promise, even as I tirelessly pick them to fill up bouquets. At this point in late June, this cutting garden is already producing enough flowers to form a complete bouquet without outside help. And even though I had not consciously planned for it, the color scheme for all flowers end up being cohesive at this stage. To build the arrangement, I start with the large blooms like the roses and lilies and try to place them in staggered heights, with the lily serving as the natural focal point. Likewise, I position the calla lilies in staggered heights and then proceed to fill the space between them with the wispy gypsophila and blue forget-me-not. Finally, I introduce snapdragon blooms wherever there is open space, and suddenly my homemade arrangement gets an air of regal elegance and old world charm. Before high summer kicks in, I grab the last dahlia tubers I had previously sprouted in pots, as well as some other annual summer seedlings, to fill in any final gaps the cutting garden may still have at this point. I also take the opportunity to stake the flower stalks of the sea holly I had planted from bare roots earlier. They look quite happy in their sunny spot and have produced many buds that will soon turn the most beautiful bluish gray hue. I place the extra dahlias everywhere there is space because I know that come fall, they will be the workhorse flower for this cutting garden. And then one day in July, I look out the window and I almost can't recognize the space. What was at first supposed to be a temporary utilitarian spot focusing on production and harvest of blooms has transformed into a proper cottage garden I would proudly have in the front yard. Now that summer is in full force and the plants have grown to their mature side and I'm getting more and more blooms, I feel that this space has become quite enchanting, maybe too enchanting to the point that I feel bad cutting things. But I do need to cut them, and I'll pick today's bouquet. And one of the highlights today is the sea holly. It's just looking phenomenal. Has grown beautifully here, and it's attaining that ethereal blue that is so nice. In the case of the roses, it's very important to keep them picked and clean to help encourage the health of the plant and also produce more flowers. At this point, I have the first gladioli being harvested, as well as all kinds of different filler annuals like floss flowers and celosia. The gypsophila with its floating white specks is performing better than I had hoped for. The purple dahlias are already pumping out their perfect showy flowers, and the sea hollies complete the cool-toned color scheme. Once again, the shift in color scheme was more of an accident than anything planned. A happy little accident. I had done the hard labor to create an enchanting little world of my own, separate from the chaos out there. A generous world that gifts out beauty and that transmutes muck, water, air, and light into precious presents. To be honest, I've been a bit hesitant of cutting things. I just enjoy the flowers the way they are, so it's kind of become just another cottage garden, and so far it seems to be a butterfly garden as well. So what's going to be in the future, I'm not sure. It might even become a vegetable garden, since some of the vegetables I planted here on the other side are looking amazing. But I love the path, I love the wattle fencing, and so far I'm enjoying it as is. It is a nice view from the windows there, so kind of makes sense for me to develop gardens in here. And I might put hedging and some kind of separation and create a sort of a secluded garden room. Whatever may happen in the future, at least this moment will be eternalized in memory. A garden is never the same twice. Much like life, it is in flux. When fall arrives, most of the plants of summer have already died, but one of the summer tubers I had planted earlier is just hitting its peak, emboldened by the chillier weather. The fading glory of a fall garden happens to be my favorite period of the year. I love the overgrown summer foliage and the realization that all this is temporary. After a year of different blooms, it's time for the dahlias to do their most beautiful show. They're going to be the most abundant all the way till frost. So it's going to be great here that they have lots of sun, and they'll produce a lot of blooms for arrangements. When late fall comes and bites the garden with its hoary frost, I take the opportunity to enjoy the outside once more before the long winter slumber forces us inside. I make sure to lift my more tender summer bulbs such as dahlias, calla lilies, and cannas that may not always return in my hardiness zone. I also take the opportunity to plant out fall bulbs, including beautiful double-petaled tulips that will grace my cutting garden early next year. And just as my front garden will then be flushed with beautiful tulip color, I will be able to come here and cut them to brighten my rooms without taking away from the main display. If you want more inspiration and education about using flowering bulbs, you can visit flowerbulb.eu, and remember that flower bulbs from Europe make the US bloom.